Hello everyone, Phoenix Knight here. Welcome to the channel, and welcome to the Summer of Lovecraft. For those of you who are around for Christmas in Arkham, this is the summer version of that campaign. For those of you who are not, during the Summer of Lovecraft, we're going to play 3 of the biggest games in the Arkham Horror files: Eldritch Horror, Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, and Elder Sign, in sequence as a small campaign. If we win each game, we'll start the next game with an extra item of some kind. But if we lose, the investigators will start the next game down 1 health and 1 sanity from their maximums. Also, if an investigator is defeated or devoured, with the exception of being defeated in Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, though being devoured will still trigger this. I'll swap out the relevant investigator or investigators. I'm getting into slight spoilers here, but that'll make the first 2 legs of the campaign especially critical. That'll make more sense when we look at the Ancient One for the campaign. But before we do that, let's go meet the investigators, and like we did for Christmas in Arkham, we're going to tell a small story to set the scene. These first 2 investigators are linked in the lore, so we'll tell their story first. Rita Young was tossing and turning in her dorm room at Miskatonic University. Part of that was her own restlessness the night before her big race the next afternoon, and part of that was her roommate seeming to be trapped in another nightmare. In all the time Rita had known her, her roommate, Amanda Sharp, had always been plagued by nightmares. But ever since the new Egyptian exhibit had come to Arkham, Amanda's nightmares had been even worse. Rita had wanted to go see the exhibit with Amanda and put her roommate's fears at ease, but training for the upcoming race had been unusually intense, so Rita hadn't been able to spare any time. Finally, Amanda screamed out her awakening, and this brought Rita into consciousness herself. Rita threw the covers off herself and rushed over to Amanda. "Is everything okay?" Rita asked anxiously. "You were having another nightmare." Amanda's face was pale and soaked in sweat, partly from the nightmare and partly from the heat. Arkham had a searing heat wave, so the windows were open to let as much cool air in as possible from the evening. Still, the evening and the night had not gotten particularly cool, so it did less good than Rita and Amanda would have liked. Amanda shook it off. "I'm fine," Amanda replied, briefly shaking off her fear to smile at Rita. "But you have your race today. I wouldn't miss that for the world." Just then, an envelope was slipped under the door. Since Rita's bed was closer to the door, she walked over and grabbed it. The outside of the envelope was ordinary, save for both of their names being written on it. As Rita tore the envelope open, 2 more envelopes fell out along with a sheet of paper. Rita turned to the paper as Amanda finally climbed out of bed to venture to the bathroom and splash some water in her face. While she waited for Amanda to return, Rita looked over the sheet of paper. She couldn't detect anything out of the ordinary about it, but someone had obviously gone to great trouble to make sure they got it. When Amanda returned, Rita unfolded the paper. "The Arkham Marathon is unfortunately canceled for this year. I need both of your help." Rita read over the note twice, her disbelief growing the second time through. "Rita?" Amanda was worried about the dazed look on Rita's face. "Rita!" Rita finally shook herself out of her daze and turned to Amanda. "The Arkham Marathon is canceled." Amanda looked just as shocked as Rita was. "Canceled?" Rita nodded. "Not only that," Rita responded, "someone needs our help." "Help?" Amanda gasped. Rita could only nod again as her attention now turned to the smaller envelopes that had fallen out of the bigger envelope with the note. Rita saw that one of the smaller envelopes had her name on it, the other Amanda's. Amanda took the envelope with her name on it and opened it at the same time Rita opened hers. "Travel itinerary?" Amanda looked puzzled, but Rita could only gasp in surprise as she looked at hers. "Sydney?" Amanda looked up at that. Rita elaborated. "Mine is a travel itinerary describing a trip to Sydney." Amanda studied hers. "Istanbul." Amanda gasped quietly in shock. That brought Rita back to her envelope, and she found another envelope inside. As she opened this envelope, Rita found plenty of information about the exhibit she and Amanda had been planning to go to, with attention being paid to the masks. A glance at the information took Rita's attention off the now-canceled Arkham Marathon, as she saw references to the crawling chaos. Amanda's held the same, and suddenly, the Arkham Marathon was the furthest thing from their minds. The two of them packed lightly and fell into travel preparations. Amanda would travel to London. At that point, she would take a series of trains to Istanbul, while Rita would cross the United States on a series of trains, where she would switch to a cruise ship in Los Angeles and venture to Sydney. Someone had paid for all of this, but who? And what was the crawling chaos? Neither one of them knew, but they would find out. I've probably tipped our Ancient One and something about our setting, but our first two investigators for the Summer of Lovecraft are the roommates at Miskatonic University, Rita Young and Amanda Sharp. Now, let's go meet our next investigator. Charlie Kane walked into his office in Arkham City Hall. The heat had been unbearable for the last couple of weeks, so he was in his shirt sleeves. The office was also air-conditioned, but the air conditioner was slightly unreliable, still being relatively new. His assistant was already hard at work, but she was also slightly flushed. "Did those deliveries get made this morning, Marge?" Charlie asked his assistant, who nodded. "Yes, Mr. Kane. I slipped the envelope under the student's dorm room first before I made my other stop." Charlie nodded at his assistant. Marge had been with him for a long time, and he knew he was in good hands. Still, he knew he had more to be done. "Call my 3 o'clock appointment, please. I need to see him sooner. I have some time this morning with the cancellation of the Arkham Marathon." Charlie had been scheduled to be the master of ceremonies for the marathon, but the race's sudden cancellation due to the extreme heat had opened up his schedule for the day. Marge looked at him after consulting his calendar. "Mr. Kane, you're due to attend the Egyptian exhibit at Miskatonic Museum later this morning." Charlie considered that information. He's supposed to be providing security there anyway, so it'll be perfect. After further considering, Charlie added, "You'd better come too, Marge." Marge nodded as Charlie stepped into his inner sanctum and closed the door. Charlie sighed in frustration as he looked down at the pile of papers on his desk that he'd been reading last night. References to the crawling chaos were all over the documents, and they made about as much sense now as they did when he'd been reading them last night. In addition, there was plenty of detail about the various masks. Charlie had been planning to attend the Egyptian exhibit in the museum to get some answers, and now that appointment was more urgent than ever. Just then, there was a knock on the door before the door swung open to reveal his assistant. "He'll be waiting for you there, Mr. Kane. Also, it's about time for us to go. Shall I call your car?" Charlie nodded at Marge. "Yes, please." Marge stepped out, leaving the door open. As he listened to Marge make the call, Charlie reflected on the documents. Now maybe I'll start to get some answers. Next to join the team for the Summer of Lovecraft is the politician, Charlie Kane. One more investigator, so let's go meet that investigator. Michael McGlenn paced the museum nervously. The O'Banion gang had sent him to provide security for the exhibit today, but he was also trying to find out who, or what, had killed his best friend. Still, he welcomed the air conditioning from being very hot in a full suit. He'd had time to peruse the exhibit, finding several interesting artifacts, but his boredom threatened quickly to overwhelm him, though he was waiting for someone. He was also waiting for someone. Michael had been pacing nervously, feeling his own restless energy, eager for a fight as he was. When the door opened, he growled at the heat interrupting his thoughts. Then he relaxed as soon as he saw who was walking in the door. The mayor of Arkham, Charlie Kane, had strolled in. Charlie looked his way briefly before making a show of going around the exhibit. In due course, Michael made his way over to the mayor. "Mr. Mayor?" Michael greeted Charlie formally without looking directly at him. "Mr. McGlenn?" Charlie returned the formal greeting without the same direct visual contact. The silence was palpable as the two ventured further into the exhibit, studying the various artifacts, paying special attention to the masks. Just then, noise erupted from outside. Stunned, the mayor and the gangster ran over to the window and saw a giant monster walking toward the museum, along with what seemed like a group of people. Both men ran outside where Michael promptly grabbed his Tommy gun and started shooting. He shot several of the people with the monster, but the monster was largely unfazed. The monster eventually retreated, and several interviews led to further mentions of the crawling chaos. No one seemed to know what to make of what it meant, and with the police around, Michael couldn't afford to stay. He took off, vowing to investigate whatever that was and how to stop it on his own. He probably looks slightly out of place on this team, but our last investigator on this year's team for the Summer of Lovecraft is Michael McGlenn, the gangster. By now, you've probably guessed who our Ancient One for this campaign is, but let's go meet him anyway for completeness' sake. As you've probably guessed, our opponent for the 2022 Summer of Lovecraft is Nyarlathotep, the Crawling Chaos. It's been quite a while since we've seen Nyarlathotep on the channel, dating back to the end of the very first Dream Eaters campaign, when we played Elder Sign as an epilogue to that campaign. You might also have guessed at the setting, but we're going to give each game a slight Egyptian flavor. Every game offers a step into an Egyptian setting of some kind. Though similar to Christmas in Arkham, we'll only get the Elder Sign Egyptian flavoring if we go into that game up 2-0, since that version is very challenging. Alas, I'm getting way ahead of myself. We have 2 more games before we get that far. Anyway, let's move back up top to wrap this video up. That will do it for the campaign intro to the Summer of Lovecraft. Eldritch Horror will be our first game in the Summer of Lovecraft Sunday, and we'll play it with an Egyptian flavor. How will we do that? You'll have to tune in and find out. For now, however, thank you for watching the video. Please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to turn on notifications so you get my content. Be well, stay safe, take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and I'll be back with more videos in the future. Until then, take care, everyone.